It is my pleasure to welcome you to the Neon Museum's PRISM Times of the Science panel discussion, Unsigned Heroes, Sign Painters, Art, and Stories. This is our first educational event of the new season, and we are extremely excited to host this conversation about the art of the hand-painted sign. It's one we've been trying to put in motion for a long time, so we're super excited. Thank you. I would like to thank John Humphreys and Earth, Water, Skylight, and Video for their continued media support for this and many other Neon Museum events, our catering friends at Divine Events, and our program sponsor, CenturyLink. Our docents have provided cards for you to write questions for the panelists, and we'll be collecting them for the question and answer portion of the conversation. As you exit today, please take a moment to fill out an evaluation form. Your feedback is incredibly important to us and our programming goals. And if you love this conversation and want to support education at the Neon Museum, please become a member. You can become a member when you leave tonight's panel in the front lobby, or you can join and get more information on our website at www.neonmuseum.org. Please note that immediately after the program, panelists Faith and Sam will be on hand signing copies of their book, Sign Painters, inside the La Concha Motel lobby. And with that, I would like to introduce our moderators. Brian McCormick has been making, I feel really like Brian McCormick. Brian McCormick, everybody give it up, thank you. Has been making pictures off and on mostly on for the last 30 years. He has a BA in art history from the University of Toronto, where he graduated with distinction. He completed his PhD coursework in art history as an excellence fellow at Rutgers. In the late 1980s, he left academia to work in the then new field of interactive software, landing eventually at ABC News as a developer in the first broadcast multimedia unit in the United States. He has won awards from ID Magazine, Art Directors Club of New York, and a Cody for his work as a creative director. Together with Mark Johnson and Jeffrey Ellis, McCormick co-founded the Vegas Vernacular Project, which documented the lesser-loved commercial signage around the valley over a 2-year period. Our other moderator is Mr. Jeffrey Ellis. Giving it up for Mr. Jeffrey Ellis. Thank you very much. He is a photographer and a graphic designer and co-founder of the Vegas Vernacular Project and founder of the fabulous Las Vegas Camera Club. In 2013, he earned an MFA degree in photography from the University of Hartford Art School, and he was a recipient of the 2007 James D. Phelan Art Award in Photography and the 2014 Beth Block Jurors Award from the Houston Center of Photography. In addition, he publishes the photozines Sad Kids and Get Off My Lawn. He has lived in Southern California, Florida, Memphis, San Jose, and San Francisco, as well as beautiful Las Vegas, Nevada. He currently splits his time between San Francisco's Mission District and downtown Las Vegas. And with that, I will give this microphone to Mr. McCormick to introduce to you the rest of our panelists.
Can everybody hear me? Yes. Okay, good. So, actually, we have a little bit of a sagging problem with the microphone. One moment, please. So the thing that I wanted to do was to talk. It's the heat, people. It's the heat. Seriously, everyone has these problems. I wanted to talk a little bit more anecdotally about why Jeffrey and I ended up doing the Vegas Vernacular Project. And to make it a little bit more personal, we're starting, with the very specific. We're starting here in Las Vegas, and we're also starting with something that was a project that was extremely personal in nature. And for me, it began when I was at Newport Lofts, looking out the window every day at the buildings at Main and Gas, which were the Gamblers General Store, Spinetti's, T&T, and I was just like, this stuff is really kind of cool. And I hadn't yet explored the city. I was new at that point in time. I'd only been here for a few months. And I met Mark Johnson, and he and I were looking around for a project to do together. And Mark came over with a book that essentially is a documentation project of the dingbat apartments in Los Angeles called Pretty Vacant. And we were like, okay, this could actually be something we could do here. Let's have a look around at what's happening. And from that very casual beginning, the project ballooned into something a lot more ambitious. And I'll just sum the Vegas Vernacular Project's achievement by saying at the end of the 2-year period of documentation, we had over 35,000 images. So in fact, there is a lot of hand-painted signage here, more so than we could ever imagine. And it's not confined to downtown. It's in every neighborhood in every part of the valley. And you can see here, there's a slide up that shows the first show that we did of the Vegas Vernacular Project at the Amanda Harris Gallery. And we actually put up about 250 pieces for that across 3 galleries at the same time. And part of the reason for doing that is that, one, we really couldn't figure out how to edit it down any more than that. And there was just such a rich variety of material, and we wanted people to be impressed by how much there was here right in front of them that they walked by every day without necessarily noticing. And we continued to expand the project beyond that once we realized that much of this was taken downtown, but there was everything on the south side, the west side, in Henderson, on East Lake Mead. I mean, there was just an abundance of stuff. And for me, it's like it began really with an interest in just the objects themselves, because of the quality of the paint, the color, and the type style. And in many cases, too, we are more interested in what you might think is wall art as opposed to just type. But past that initial interest in just the objects themselves, it becomes obvious after a while that there's a consistency of style out there, that there are definable characteristics to the type. And it's like, okay, it's pretty obvious, we didn't know this at the time, but it's pretty obvious that one individual has painted this, who isn't? And, that began an expansion of the project to people, as opposed to just the objects themselves. And you can see here, there's an object at the top left, and that was by John Peterson. The VW van is by Wendell Edwards. The office sign is by King Richard. And the boxer sign, Jeffrey, is by who? Maynard? Yeah. So, those were just a few of the names that we associated with the objects. The jukebox that's there is actually from Russell Road. And there are fragments, that are strip-based, the northern part of the strip, obviously Atomic Liquors and whatnot. But anyway, the first person that we ended up talking to was a result of being introduced to John Peterson. And this, by the way, is King Richard on the right, your right or left. And I can't do that, your other left, and Wendell Edwards. But the first person we met was John Peterson. And John was responsible for a lot of the hand-painted stuff that's inside Atomic, and also the exteriors. There's a big gap between what's inside and what he did on the outside most recently. But John was the first person who really talked about craft and how much time it took for him to actually learn how to become a sign painter. And for me, naively, this was something I hadn't really thought about. It's like I just didn't think there was that much effort that went into it. And he told me that he spent the first 5 years in Minnesota digging holes in the ground for signs for the guy that he was apprenticed with. And when he was finally past that point, he asked him, "Why did you make me dig holes for 5 years?" It's like, because if you weren't willing to do that, you don't have what it takes to learn the rest of it. And he then told me it took him another 5 years to acquire the skills to really become a sign maker. It's beyond the painting. It's learning how to, calculate wind shear forces for a sign when you're putting it up, how to wire something if electricity is involved, learning all the type styles that are out there.
Okay. Hey. Well, the reason I have King Richard first is because he is probably the most prolific sign painter downtown. We looked around for him for quite a while, and he's really elusive. I mean, he'd be out one day, and we hear, oh, King Richard is down the street, and we go try and find him, and we could never find him. It took us almost a year to find him, even though he's always on Main Street. So, he's the man that probably got us really interested in most of the stuff, because we see his stuff on Main Street all the time. But he's been painting for 60 years, 1948 or so, yeah. And he moved to Vegas in the 70s or 80s, I believe. But he did the Galaxy Phone Building, which you may be familiar with, and it's one of the really amazing pieces that's left. Its fate is in the air because it's been being renovated, but it's so many different typefaces on the building, and it's all his, but they're all different. I mean, it's like you got cursive and block lettering, and misspellings, which are always the best, etc. I love the ECT, but it's a fantastic specimen, and he's probably one of the main reasons we began doing what we were doing.
Yeah. It's interesting, too, because there's a fragment inside, behind these portions that say vinyl fabrics and foam cut to size. There had actually been originally a splash on the glass, but unfortunately that was broken. And the reason that the wooden stuff is up there is because the owners never replaced the glass. They just put wood over the top of it. And, that's kind of a common feature, too, in Vegas. Sign painting happens because it's expedient sometimes, not just because it's the best solution necessarily. It's the least expensive.
Yeah.
And this is John, obviously, and his work at Atomic.
Yeah, and unfortunately John's been in and out of the hospital, for the past year or so, but, his work on Atomic Liquors was pretty amazing. And he's done a bunch of stuff around town as well.
Yeah, he did the Gamblers General Store, TNT, a couple of things actually that are actually gone now. So unfortunately, there was no way to see them.
And we asked him about quite a few of his signs, and this was one of my favorite stories. This is over at the TNT. Was it a lawnmower place? And initially, instead of a rose bush underneath the lawnmower, he had drawn a cat and painted a cat that was about to get run over by the lawnmower. And someone complained, so he had to go and paint a rose bush instead. But he always would complain about.
Yeah, the lines of the cat are still there.
Yeah,
if you look really hard.
And then Joe Jones is another guy that painted a lot of stuff downtown. He did some of the Atomic Liquor stuff as well. And we visited his apartment. It was next to the bunkhouse. And he had all these really elaborate carvings and sculptures of all the old signs. Like here, he's holding up a sand sign. In the background, you can see the stratosphere made out of foam. He did the Sahara. I think this Atomic Liquors one is also out of foam. And he also had a lot of these guys don't catalog their work, but he had a bunch of really cool photos of what he had done. And he's holding up a Polaroid picture there of one of his pieces. But he was also he was really well trained. He was a cartoonist for a long time.
Yeah, he had the unfortunate luck of being trained as an animator, all hand-based cell stuff, just as Disney went to computer.
Yeah.
So he ended up being a sign painter, not necessarily by first choice.
And here's some of his other work downtown. The Feet by Maxi and the hair salon stuff is now gone. It's at the Carson building, or actually the Carson Hotel. Johnny Carson. Yeah. And then, the bunkhouse saloon sign, he painted that stuff.
And all the exterior signs on the bunkhouse were his as well.
And then just a few other pieces of random stuff. The King Richard exclamation point, you can always tell his stuff because there's a little cat head bottom to the exclamation point. And then Joe Jones, the free sign, which is a free parking down at the Western Hotel. He did all the Western stuff too.
Yeah, that free is now at the doggy park.
Yeah.
So the dogs can enjoy it. And there's also, we just tossed these in here, but the Tide sign, for example, and the Blackjack, those are kind of like the Tide definitely is like the more naive stuff, right? It's done by people that aren't necessarily trained. But there's a lot of great stuff out here. That's some of the most outrageous art stuff that's out there. It was done by people clearly without training, versus something like that fragment that says reasonable rates, which is clearly done by somebody with training.
And then just a few more. And then this is all just to give you context of what's local. I mean, a lot of times we would be out places and someone would say, what are you photographing? And we'd say, we're photographing these hand-painted signs. And they were like, what do you mean hand-painted signs? And I'm like, well, they're everywhere. Just look up from where you're standing. I mean, there's, window pieces, like the guy with the crown on, and then there's, the Bales Bonds guy with at the 513 Main, and then the Western Hotel. I mean, they're just everywhere, but people would never understand what we were talking about. And we'd always run into people, they'd come out of their businesses and they'd be like, what are you doing? Oh, we're just taking a picture of this sign, They're like, why? And we're like, well, because we think it's really cool. And they're like, are you from the city? No. Are you going to fine us? No. We're interested in this stuff. I mean, we had so many talks, and a lot of times people would finally just say, okay, well, I get it finally. But, it was a lot of convincing and a lot of talking to people. And they would always end up being cool about it. But
yeah, Mr. Larkin was probably the person who started out, on the verge of calling the police, but then invited us in and started talking about everything. He told me this great story about when he was a kid, and he remembered standing on a tree stump at the location where Larkin is now, an industrial, when he was a kid, before they built the building, when that was the middle of nowhere in Las Vegas. So it was just like, he gets and understands the history of the company because it's a family business, and they've carefully maintained that identity as a result.
Yeah, so we definitely wanted to set the tone for everything and let you guys know that this stuff is here, and I'm sure you all know that it's here, but a lot of people don't. And
definitely look. It's there. The thing is, it obviously gets passed by because this is a car culture and it's so easy to just whip by it. We spend a lot of time on foot, and that's actually a more fruitful way of finding a lot of things. I also want to mention, too, it's really important that, Jeffrey and I are not the only people that were involved in this. We had, volunteers out there taking pictures as well for this repository that we hope someday can actually get out there into public hands.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, I think we will turn it over to Sam and Faith. And I'm supposed to read the bios here. So. Faith Levine is an artist, photographer, filmmaker, and curator based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. She is the founder of Art vs. Craft and curates Sky High Gallery. Levine's first film and book, Handmade Nation, The Rise of DIY Art, Craft, and Design, was published by Princeton Architectural Press. She co-directed Sign Painters, which stylistically explores the unacknowledged art form of hand-painted signs through anecdotal accounts from artists across the country. The film celebrates artisans, keeping the 150-year-old sign painting tradition alive with a bespoke approach and appreciation for achieving balance between art and information. Sam Macon is Milwaukee-born, Chicago-based filmmaker, photographer, and writer. He received his BFA in film from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee and directs music videos, commercials, short films, and documentaries. Macon co-directed Sign Painters with Faith Levine, and he just informed me that he loves tacos.
Oh no, I told them.
He told me.
Yeah. No, I was joking that our bios are a little out of date. And that one for Faith was very thorough, so now I don't know what we're going to talk about.
Tacos.
No, I'm just kidding. So, aside from tacos, Faith and I made a film called Sign Painters. And we got a trailer coming up here in a second that will help give you guys a context for anyone who doesn't know the project. We spent, upwards of 3 years working on documenting sign painters, the work they do, and their stories across the majority of the United States, which ultimately resulted in making a film and a book of the same title. And it's really interesting listening to Brian and Jeffrey talk about their project, because when we began the project, we were starting at it from a vantage point, and we can go more into our process once we get going. But we were starting at it from a position where Faith knew some people, and we had a direct line into people that called themselves sign painters, which was surprising to me that was even still a vocation or ever was, even though I was a very visually kind of in-tuned person and always gravitated towards interesting signage, be it neon, be it sign painting, be it even just like a well-done, mass-produced sign. I've just always been obsessed with lettering and the way these signs define environments, but I'd never really put it together that sign painting was a job, and that these were signs that were made in different areas that defined those spaces. And that's why, as you travel across America, places would look different from one other place, because it wasn't one mass-produced sign being broadcast from far to a million other locations, rendering every place kind of looking the same. So my own ignorance is really motivating, and at that point there was very little information online to learn more about sign painting. And in the time that we've been working on the project, which even though the movie's technically done and the book is out, it's been very fluid for us because we've been traveling and speaking with people and meeting new painters. It's been really great to see other similar but different projects come about that document, say, just what's going on in the city of Las Vegas. I mean, you could make a movie just about that. And the worst/best part of our travels, having made the movie, is that we just keep meeting people and seeing signs that we wish we would have shot. But, you live, you learn. So if it was up to us, we maybe would have never finished making the movie. But we did, and let's show the trailer to give everybody a look.
So the guy, hi, I'm Faith. The guy at the end who said, "I like to make signs that turn into art," that's Phil Vandervaart, and Phil is based in Minneapolis, where I was living in the late 90s. I grew up in Seattle and moved to the Midwest then. And a bunch of my friends who I was hanging out with at the time sought Phil out because he had painted all of the signs that were in the neighborhood where we hung out on the West Bank. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Minneapolis, but so they started hanging out at Phil's shop, and at that point we had all been dabbling in painting signs, and I had always been interested in letters. I'd always photographed signs, but that was the first time for me at the age of 19 where I had heard of someone being called a sign painter, and it was a really it was an impactful moment for me that really never went away. And the group of friends that I hung out with at that point in time all went on to, at this point, have sign shops around the country, and one of them is located in Stockholm. And over the course of the last 10, 15 years, those people all stayed in my life, and I started doing research-based projects. And every once in a while, although I don't paint signs anymore, and I haven't for a long time, I would, do a Google search for sign painting or sign painters, or it was something that I was interested in. And it was always surprising to me how little information was available. And when I finished working on my first documentary, Sam and I have collaborated on projects over the years, and we knew we wanted to work together on something longer, and so that's when I talked to him about working on this project, and like he said, he was like, "Well, what's a sign painter?" And I was like, "Well, you know what a sign painter is," and we talked about it because I know what Sam's aesthetics are, and he was like, "Oh, yeah, that sounds cool, but do you think there's actually enough, content to make a feature-length documentary?" And I was like, "Yeah, I do." And so we really just jumped in at that point and started working with the people that I knew and their mentors, and then we started building this database of resources of people who said, "Well, if you talk to this person, you got to talk to this person," and just sort of followed the leads. And before we knew it, we had more people contacting us and more contacts than we knew what to do with, which is how we ended up in Vegas, which is how we met Mark Otis. And a lot of times we would Sam would cold call people and say, we're making a documentary about sign painting. And the sign painters would be like, "What?
Who the hell are you?
Who are you? What's going on?" And so really from the very beginning, Sam and I decided that we wanted to make a film that was an informative piece for the general public, because so many people didn't know what a sign painter was. I mean, we still run across it, all the time. I mean, when people ask me what I do, and I tell them I make films, and then I say, they'd say, "What film did you make?" And I'm like, "Oh, I made a film about sign painting." And they're like, "What's sign painting?"
Yeah, there are two responses that you get from someone when you tell them you made a documentary about sign painting. They either look at you like they have they have no idea what you're talking about, or they say, "Oh, that's amazing." There's nothing in between. And what's fascinating about the "what do you mean" or "what's a sign painter" question is that you would think it would be generational, that someone in their 20s wouldn't know what a sign painter was. But what's interesting is that, folks much older than us, when sign painting was the go-to way or the primary way one would get a sign, they would have the same response. So what you got is basically a trade that has been so essential to the signage and basically the aesthetic makeup of the modern city, going from being so ubiquitous that people don't notice to almost not being there. And so you've got multiple generations not knowing what a sign painter is.
But we knew that there was going to be an interest and that there was a market for a film about the painters themselves. And so we really, we wanted to make this informative piece for the general public, but ideally with the folks from the sign industry embracing the film as well, which I think we feel like, in the end was what we were able to come out with. And to clarify, because there is some confusion sometimes, the book and the film are each standalone pieces, and the book was based on content that we shot from the film. It came out first because our publisher had a budget and a deadline, both of which we did not have with the film. And so it ended up working out really well because the book kind of established and branded the project for us. And then about 6 months later, we had our world premiere at the Renwick Gallery, which is a Smithsonian museum, who I had a relationship with from my previous work. And they were excited enough about the project and trusted me to book us a premiere without ever watching the film. So we had to finish it.
Right.
So.
That's why we stopped shooting.
Yeah, Sam would have shot forever. We had 120 hours of footage that we whittled down to the 80-minute documentary. And out of curiosity, how many of you have seen the film here? So quite a few of you. Cool. It is online now, and we're working on getting the DVDs out just to put that out there because people always ask.
And to help explain why we didn't have a schedule or a budget or what have you, and why we didn't film every inch of sign painter earth in the United States of America, is because the slide that is now up is myself, Travis, our cinematographer, and then Faith is taking the photo. So the entire movie was made by the three of us, with some friends producing from afar. But it was relatively I wouldn't call it ragtag. I would say that it was agile and responsive. And one example of that was, we would go to cities knowing who we were going to talk to. Maybe it had been a call, maybe it had been an email, but we had at least set up one appointment to shoot. And when we came to Vegas, we knew we would be talking to Mark Otis, who was...
Or we hoped we would be.
Yeah,
Mark and his wife.
I hope I had talked to him before. I'm not sure. Did we just show up on your doorstep, Mark?
We called you.
We called ahead of time. But the entire filmmaking process was very journalistic. We didn't go out with a very rigid or defined idea of exactly what movie we were going to make. So we were always following the lead. And that included, coming to Las Vegas, a very sign essential city in terms of when the average American thinks about signs, they're going to think about Las Vegas, they're going to think about Times Square, and that might be it. These are sign meccas to an average American who only has a distant affection for signs. That or Route 66 or something. And so we knew Vegas was a place that we had to go. All of our deciding where to shoot was based on connections to actual sign painters and some geographical touchstones that had to be met. And Vegas was one of those. So we came to Vegas knowing that we were going to interview Mark, and then proceeded to have a really great interview with Robert Curry, who's another painter here, but that all happened absolutely last minute. And after having had this great interview with Robert, which was after having a great interview with Mark and Rose, we then stopped in a parking lot that had a sign, a really great sign, saying, sign shop around the corner, sign painter for hire. So we just had accidentally parked in a parking lot of another sign painter, and this is, this all happens within 6 hours of time, maybe.
Yeah. So, what was I going to is there one more slide, or is it just the next clip?
Oh no, I got another slide.
Oh, you have the slides. So, what else?
Well, one of the things that was important when we began, when we then go and tell someone that we're making a documentary about sign painters, and I imagine this is maybe similar to when you guys are explaining what you're doing. You explain that you're making a movie about sign painters, and they think it sounds like it's like an old timey thing, or it's a history lesson, or it's a Ken Burns documentary where the pictures are moving in from one, and there's banjo music and it's very romantic, and it's not at all current or living. And that's something that Faith and I absolutely knew we did not want to make. One, because the primary reason being because there are still sign painters out there, and a huge motivating factor for us to make this movie, basically the best case scenario is that some of these sign painters get calls more often. They get to paint signs for businesses. Those businesses stay in business because the outside of their business is represented in a way that looks like they care, and that they embrace the community embraces them, and then our towns and main streets look better. That's like the best case scenario, and we hope that's happened in some capacity. But in the name of keeping things very current, or making this a document of living things, current things, people that are working now within a historical context, that spilled over to the way that we've done our screenings, and these are two examples of that. These are signs that are made. One is made by the black and white one. I guess it would be on, yeah.
They're both show cards.
Yeah, our show cards for our film. One is made by a gentleman named John Downer, who is a master letterer. He actually parlayed his lettering career, or his sign painting career, into lettering for the computer. He's also a photographer. The other one is made by a recent graduate of the only sign painting school, 2-year degree, technical college that you can walk out the doors with a sign graphics degree, LA Trade Tech, taught by Doc Guthrie.
The only one that's still left.
Yeah, after having, there used to be many. So there's a recent student with the tiger, and then a black and white one done by a long, well-known master letterer.
And John would hate the other sign for sure.
Yeah, he was pretty.
If anyone
very
knows
particular.
John, yeah, he's very particular. So.
Yeah, he'd probably have something to say about that Sahara sign if you gave him the opportunity. He had something to say about everything. But great guy, honestly. But the idea being that this was a current thing, it was actively happening, and it's not in a time capsule, it's not in a bubble. And the next clip, which is going to be sort of our sign-off, is kind of the uber example of that. One of the films that we show, or one of the people that we show, or groups of sign painters that we show in the film, is an outfit called Colossal, and this Sky High sign crew. They are painters that do huge walls in New York City and have really changed the way a lot of the commercial advertising in New York is. And this is all happening now. This is all recent.
And really quickly before you start it, just to give you some context, we interviewed over 50 people around the country, and not everyone obviously made it into the final copy of the film, and we're working on getting some of those clips into additional features. And then there's some people featured in the book that aren't in the film. But the interesting thing with the Sky High crew from Colossal is that they are working in public in a way and working on big ad campaigns for companies. Their client list is very contemporary, and so a lot of younger people know who they are because they use social media in connection with doing these traditional wall jobs. And so they've exposed a younger generation to hand paint in a way that I don't think anyone else really has done as successfully. And when we went to interview them, they basically interviewed us first before letting us interview them because they're very protective and they take their jobs very seriously. So they're a really incredible company that takes their jobs really seriously, and we've developed a really great relationship with them. And the fact that they offered to do this wall to promote our film was like a huge deal, and it ran for at least 3 months in Williamsburg until someone else leased the wall out. So it was really cool for us to go there for our screening and to see the poster that they designed for us on a big wall in Williamsburg. It was kind of one of the highlights, I think, of my career. So
yeah,
it was cool.
It's the only time Faith and I will ever have our hands on New York real estate. Probably.
Yeah.
And the sign was up way longer than the movie was in the theater.
And we apologize if this isn't taking up the full screen. We'll see what happens, but hopefully it will. So.
Yeah.
master, and I've been working for Colossal for just over 4 years now. I have a long history of painting and 15 years in the vinyl sign business, actually. My generation, a lot of us were involved in art, but when I started, that's just what we did. Everybody was about writing on stuff, and somehow signs was just a part of that. The vinyl sign business was good to me. I could travel and have work, but it certainly was not a fulfilling job. Everybody thinks that we just paint all day, and they immediately assume that we can go right up on the side of the building and start painting. Most of the job that we do is rigging, and it's a real physical job. There's thousands of pounds of gear. We either haul stuff upstairs or up rows upside the building, blocking out a wall white, and then patterning. A patterning job can take 2 hours to an entire day. Nobody really realizes that and sees the hard work. So once we start painting, that's just as hard as rigging, but it's mental at that point. But you got years of rigging before you get up on that wall. You got to earn your place, and we got to know that if you're on a rig, you know what to do if something does go wrong. We get amazing painters here. They come in, think they're just going to go paint. It's dangerous work. People get hurt or killed, really easy. But we have more than just ourselves to think about. We have to think about the public. Matt's an awesome lettering guy. He designed the poster, and so we just thought it would be awesome if he could get up there and do it with us, because he fully deserves a little bit of recognition. He's a badass. I think people just like art. There is something there, you know what I mean? And especially when it's done at this caliber. There's something real there. Something inside of us, and then it hits the wall. It hits the surface. Good is good, and it stands the test of time.
So that Matt guy was shy. The last name wasn't an accident. I don't know if anybody noticed Matt last name. Anyway, so I think they're one example of how sign painting is very much still alive, and they definitely always get asked the question. They get the question, "What are you guys doing?" if they were painting.
And I guess I really quickly just wanted to add that there were so many elements when we started shooting this film of different things to hit on as far as an informative piece for the general public to explain, you know, what is sign painting, because there are these giant walls and there are these window jobs and there's I mean, it's endless really the amount of content to cover, and so this really is just one segment of so many things, and we tried to cover as much as possible in the film. And we will always, every once in a while, we'll do a screening and we'll be at a Q&A, and there'll be like a sign painter in the audience. And one time this guy was like, "Well, I just want to know why you guys didn't talk about zoning." And we were like, "Well, we don't really think that everyone
Can't head into the weeds about zoning.
And so there was so, once we started digging into these interviews with people, I mean, really, you could just do endless interviews with people about all of the different elements of what goes into the different jobs and the extent of what all these different people's talents are and specific talents.
And few know that better than Mark Otis.
Yes, Mark Otis. Thank you, Sam and Faith. So Mark has 42 years of experience in the sign industry, beginning with his enrollment in the Sign and Pictorial Painters Local Union number 1045 in 1972. He served a 5-year union apprenticeship and graduated as a journeyman. He is a founding member of the Letterheads, a trade organization dedicated to education and the dissemination of traditional sign methods, principles, and techniques. He has worked in all phases of the sign industry, including sign design, sign painting, billboard painting, mural painting, and electric sign design and fabrication. In addition, Otis is the recipient of more than 60 international awards for excellence in sign design, including 11 first-place awards in the annual ST design competition, as well as awards from the Society for Environmental Graphic Design and the Themed Entertainment Association. He also painted this amazing sign that's in front of us right here. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mark.
Hi. I work at Yesco, and so this is really exciting to be in the middle of our portfolio. Am I good? The bio talks about the amount of time that I've been in the trade, and in fact, the picture that's on the screen right now is a typical sign class that was taken about the time that I started, and there everything was in black and white then. There actually wasn't color. We had to do everything just in gray, actually, I think this is something I got off online. I think it's probably a British example. I recognize the word craftsmanship at the top, which is in Gill Sands, which is designed by a great British type designer named Eric Gill. But this classroom scene is real reminiscent of what we had when I started in the trade. The instructor, obviously we didn't have to wear coats and ties, but the instructor on the blackboard is dead drafting a Roman alphabet. The guys at the table are having to draw those. They're having to learn about spacing, having to learn about serifs. They're having to learn about negative space within and outside the lettering. So this is my background in the, and incidentally, I loved hearing about who was talking about post hole digging.
Oh yeah, John Peterson.
Yeah, the first day I showed up to work in my first shop, which I thought I'd died and gone to heaven, the guy said, "Did you go to college?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, that's okay, because today you're going to start off working on your PhD, which are the initials for post hole digging." And I just loved it, and you're right. Did a whole lot of it for the first year that I was in the biz. So this scene, which I think was probably from an American source, was a lot like the basement at Jerry Albright's studio back in Denver, where we used to work, and we would have 10 or 15 people. That's how my wife Rose and I met, and we would put your paper, your sign blank up on the bench. You can always tell a seasoned sign painter versus somebody who hasn't been doing it for a while, because to run the straight lines, to lay it out, you just take a yardstick and a piece of charcoal and run the lines off the bottom of the bench. You rarely measure anything. But start working on alphabets, start working on strokes. This is a wonderful example from the Speedball book, circa about 1920, done by Ross F. George. He's calling it show card Gothic. It could also be called block or sign painter's Egyptian. But what you notice is there's a little brush there showing the economy of strokes that was expected this is American style sign painting. Sign painting of this era in Europe was still outlined and filled in, but in the U.S. everything had to be done a lot faster, so we had to learn how to really letter very quickly with neatness and dispatch, squaring up all those corners. And if you've seen the movie, you've seen some really good examples of this. When I was getting into it, work like this, this is really terrific. I also found this online. This was an example of sign painters' exemplars. This was all work that had been done by one sign painter as a journeyman project, circa about 1930. This piece, which was really big, it was about 8 by 8 feet, recently auctioned at Sotheby's, at Christie's. for a lot of money because it was really scarce. It's this perfect, impeccable lettering, all done by hand, and it's highly collectible. And we had to turn out these. We had to turn out these alphabet example pieces as our first, second, third, fourth, and fifth year apprentice tests in order to be able to move on to the next level. Really important guy to me was Mike Stevens, who was an excellent sign painter, but he taught that as important as lettering and alphabets were, that layout, the use of lights and darks, the use of balance, the use of negative space around the format was even more important. This was an example of some quick, just practice, casual work. I think I probably lettered that back in those days in about 5 minutes or so. I was really influenced by every example from earlier eras that I could get a hold of. This is work from a show card artist named H.C. Martin. I collected all of his books. This was stuff that was published back in the 20s and the 1930s. Great color combinations. I used to practice all these things. This is one cut from a book that is extremely important to me in my career. My former mother-in-law's father was a guy named Henry Asmus, who had been a sign painter all of his career in Colorado. And when he died, they gave me a book called Atkinson's Sign Painting Up to Now, which was published in about 1905. This was the book, upon study and study and study, that caused me to want to find out about sign painting and to find out that, and to be very surprised to find out that there was such a career and that there was a union and an apprentice program that I could join. So, and also because of that, obviously, you can see that I had a lot of interest in period styles. I decided that I wanted to do it and approach it from a design standpoint and be able to work and be conversant in all of these different genres and vernaculars within sign painting. And of course, we did all of that work with one shot, which is just one of several oil-based enamel lettering media, and I can smell this piece. When we were sitting up here, it was really, I mean, the sign that I lettered on the weekend is still outgassing. So you can get up close and catch a whiff of it if you like to, but my car just reeks. So this is an example of a piece that I did, these commemorative pieces over the years. As Sam and Faith mentioned, I and 6 of my friends back in Denver, all of who were union apprentices, formed a little club in 1975 called Letterheads, because a lot of the stuff we were interested in was not being taught in the sign school anymore. So we found these old sources, we found these books, we found old sign painters that were willing to come and do demos for us. And that was in 75, and the 40th annual Letterhead meeting, of which there are still many meetings being held all over the world. I think there are several thousand members that began from our original 6. And the 40th is going to be held. Yes, everybody go ahead and hand in your sheets. I promise to remember to do that. So anyway, next year in September of 2015 will be our 40th anniversary meeting. You're all invited. It's going to be in Cincinnati, and it's going to be held at the the American Sign Museum, which is the all-time perfect setting. It is similar to the Neon Museum in that it has pristine examples of sign painting on glass, of sign painting or signs made in many media, collected. Really, I think their oldest piece is about 150 years old, and it's a terrific museum. So anyway, a lot of the work that I do originates with Sharpie sketches, and this is true all day long at YESCO too. Sometimes it's some whimsical thing like this that's just got kind of an Art Deco feel. Sometimes it's something like, this is a sketch I did recently for a piece that was then rendered in white on black, like chalkboard art. Here's an example of a, probably a half-hour sketch. Some years ago, I was at a design conference in Boston with my salesman, and we attended a riveting speech and seminar that was given by a guy named Marty Sklar, who was the outgoing head of Walt Disney Imagineering. And I'd grown up watching the Mickey Mouse Club with my mouse ears on, and I was just rapt. I was hanging on every word, and this salesman of mine walks up into the middle of this group of designers that were just gathered around Marty Sklar, shoves his hand through the middle of everybody with one of my business cards and said, "You should call us. We do work like you do." And I just grabbed the guy, pulled him in the next room, chewed him out, said if I ever was going to approach Disney to do work, it certainly wouldn't be that way, and that's not the right way to do it. And a week later, I got a call from Marty Sklar, and it was pre-internet, so he said, "I got this business card in Boston. What do you guys do?" So immediately we put together a portfolio. A couple of weeks later, I was on a plane, and there began about nearly a 10-year period of time of working as a consultant for Walt Disney Imagineering, which was the dream of my life. And so I come in as a concept artist and sometimes do finish work for them as well. This is an example of one of probably a dozen sketches that I made for this particular sign location in Buena Vista Street, which is a Disney's California Adventure that opened in 2012. These are different development sketches that I was doing on the way to ultimately going out and doing this painted piece on site, which is that they have that little red car, which is these terrific trolleys, which we also did all the lettered show cards and everything for inside, is housed in back of that gate. So, that's an example of work that I'm still doing. And then I got the contract to go out and do the painted graphics in the field. And so I and my wife Rose, who's here doing some really terrific lettering, and I were scrambling around in scaffolding like we were when we first met 30 years ago. And every night we realized we either need to quit doing it or do a lot more of it. The place we were staying had a hot tub, and it was really welcome at the end of every day. Prior to this is a logo I designed in gold leaf work for Tokyo Disney Sea. This is the Disney park in Tokyo for McDuck's department store. It was a great privilege to work on this project because I got to design every sign for 3 lands at that park, including this area, which was called American Waterfront. And it was New York City circa 1910, which meant that there was just a sign on everything that would hold still. Like signs on the front of stairs, signs on windows, signs everywhere. So it was terrific, and it was all on this period stuff, which was my special interest. And in fact, this little facade is really important to me because as I started working on the project, sometimes I got enough confidence that they started including me not just on design but also on copywriting, what they refer to as show writing. And there was this one facade that they hadn't figured out what they were going to call it yet. they asked me for my opinion, and I said, with all these signs everywhere, there needs to be a sign shop. And so the idea was embraced, got a chance to design and execute all these signs. And you may notice that in the corner, it says the Asmus Company. So I got a chance to do a sign that went to a theme park in Tokyo that acknowledged the guy who gave me the book, who got me interested in the trade over across the span of about 30 years. It was pretty great. So our work has taken us all over the place. This is some stuff on the East Coast, Myrtle Beach, also in the period vernacular. This is a piece that I did, sort of a trompe-l'oeil piece to look as if it had been made in tile in Lodi, California. Here in Las Vegas, we did all of the theme graphics at Paris. This is a buffet sign. We did some specialty glass work. This is mother of pearl and gold leaf, and this is meant to look as if it might have been the office for Gustav Eiffel while he was designing the tower. Sunset Station, Club Madrid. And then recently, this was really a lot of fun. I don't know if anybody's been down to Double Barrel yet at the Monte Carlo, but it was really fun to go down there. They created walls with all these disparate wall surfaces, rough out wood, smooth wood. We created like a faux concrete wall, and then got up, and then we just covered everything with lettering. So we got to do all this custom lettering on everything. It was great. And then sometimes I do pieces. This was a commission piece that needed to be like movie quality. Most everything you see here, including the high relief on all those slats, is faux. In other words, it's all painted to look as if it's more dimensional than it is, or I guess more rough than it is. And this is the little piece that I did for the showing of the movie that was at the Velveteen Rabbit back in November, which was fun and kind of similar. And I think, Jeff, you contacted me on the 2 days before. Could you do a sign for this piece? No, I think you said, could I come down and letter people's names? And I said, no, but I'll knock out a sign. And it was really a lot of fun. And this is like this little guy as I was painting, I was thinking it's kind of an alter ego. These are these old guys that I used to admire. That would just stand there with a cigar chomped in their teeth, with mineral spirits and other volatile solvents all around. Little container down on the shelf that may or may not be mineral spirits. And I lettered pop on the guy's coffee cup, and then I looked at this picture of me working on a wall from a few years ago and thought, there's really some similarities, this just a real old crusty guy. So maybe he's my alter ego, and then this is what I do every Saturday, because sign painting is like playing a violin. I mean, you have to keep your hand in, you have to practice. I just get out, throw some brown paper up on the bench and just try and just fill it up with as much lettering as I can, and just try to do something new and something different, and try to stay real low, real focused, keep the brush flooded, and that brings us up to the minute. That's my presentation.
Okay, thanks, Mark. We have some questions here. I had a quick question first. It said your 5-year apprenticeship, you graduated as a journeyman, Mark?
Yes.
What are the levels of sign painters, and are sign painters now taking as long? I mean, I know there's a 2-year program that gets you a degree now as a sign painter, but I mean, like back in your day when you were training as a sign painter, how long did it take, and what are the levels?
It's a good question. I'll try and keep it brief, but the main, if there's a difference, and I agree there is a difference between learning nowadays and apprenticeship nowadays, is at that time it was completely tied to where you're going to work. It was a viable craft. It was a trade. It was in demand, and so if you're going to go to a bulletin shop, what most people think of as billboards, but the distinction being hand-painted billboards are referred to in the trade as bulletins, then you had to have a lot of background in that. Like I've done a ton of work of the kind that was shown in that trailer. So you'd have to spend a lot of time literally learning how to rig a swing stage. You had to learn how to use those tools if you're going to work. And of course, incidentally, and I know we've talked about it with you guys, as you were working on the film and you had to keep the topic narrow, in addition, there was just sign making generally. And so we were learning silk screening, you'd learn carving, you'd learn all these many things. And I know that you went to shops where there are people doing all this other stuff too, but had to keep things kind of focused on sign painting. So part of the apprenticeship would include many other things besides just painting signs. You'd be cutting stencils, you'd be just learning a lot of other skills.
Post hole digging.
Yeah, you bet. Go for it.
Can you turn on the song? I just wanted to add on a quick afternoon on that, which was, it wasn't until Sam and I were at the Sign Museum in Cincinnati talking with Todd Swarmstead, where we hadn't even thought, even though it seems really obvious, especially sitting here, where with the neon signs, that the backs of the neon signs were all hand painted. And so, there are things that seem really obvious that even while we were working on the film became like these aha moments. And so you just don't even, the extent of the directions that you could go. And it wasn't until Todd said that, and we're like, oh yeah, I guess we had maybe talked about it, but.
Yeah, no, I the same thing. Just recently, I had never thought about the backgrounds of the neon signs being painted as well. Obviously they are, but I think I heard something about the Jerry's Nugget sign. It was I don't want to get it wrong, but it was just like a one shot, quick around the.
Correct. Yeah. In fact, the guy who did the restoration on that one was Kevin Kelly, who is the head of our exterior sheet metal department. He's really skilled at a lot of things. Rarely gets an opportunity to do that, but it does bear saying, since we're in the middle of this environment, and that's a perfect example. That's not a typeface, and the definitions that have been handed out, I think, make the distinction between hand lettering and typography and fonts. Those are terms that are really have become kind of interchangeable now, but which cause sign painters to bristle, because sign painting is making lettering one time for use in that application, as opposed to typography, which is an entirely different discipline. So most of the designers who originally drew on their bench the signs that you're surrounded by right now had training in lettering. In fact, a lot of these people were people that at one time or another in their career were sign painters. So they had to be able to go out, pick up a grease pencil, and do a design very much like the ones you see here on glass or on the side of a truck. That's why, in my estimation, the verdict will be out for a while, to see whether or not the signs that are being done now, which are all created by people who are only used to designing with type, are as interesting or have as much character or seem as much of their period and of their time 20 or 30 years ago as these do now.
We had.
I was just going to say, in general, we have a lot of questions, probably more than we have time for. So,
we'll get to as many
So
as we
get
can.
comfortable, everybody.
Yeah,
precisely.
be here until midnight. Kidding. So to Mark, a question: what is the largest sign you've painted, and how long did it take?
Well, I don't want to say that it was big. But it took 5 gallons just to dot the I. Man, was that ever a big sign? No, I can't tell you that, but no, it's not true. But sure, yeah, it's true. What do you mean? You're talking to sign painter, but what I can tell you is one of the one that I have a feeling might have caused the guys at Colossal to have some admiration was the first out-of-town date my wife Rose and I ever went on, and I know we showed you some pictures. In fact, there's some in the film where we got a call to do gold leafing on Roman numerals at the top of a green granite building in New Orleans. And that was 327 feet up on the side of this curved building. The letters were about 12 feet tall. I don't remember how many tens of thousands of dollars worth of gold leaf that we used, but the only thing I do remember, since we were just dating, we just got together, is we tore up the French Quarter all night, and then we went out and got up on that scaffolding at real early every morning. So, but anyway, that doesn't really answer the question.
It's big. It was a big sign.
5 gallons.
Let's tell the tale.
Sam and Faith, where can those of us who missed the movie see it? And have you considered doing a sequel?
Well, the first answer is easier. The first question is easier to answer. It is available online as of now on just about every online delivery service except Netflix, but I believe it will end up there. That includes iTunes, Amazon, Google Play, all that jazz. We also have, if you just Google Sign Painters or put in Sign Painters movie, Sign Painters film, you'll go up to our website and you can just watch the film directly there. And I think more or less pay what you want. And
That's not true.
yeah, well, it's less than.
Okay, but it's not okay.
Okay.
That was misleading. I just.
There's a minimum. There's an absolute base minimum. Yeah, she's yeah. Anyways, you can't pay nothing. That's what you can't pay. Other than that, you can pay about whatever you want. Anyways, and we'll be making physical DVDs that will hopefully be out soon. What was the second question?
Sequel or
We totally encourage someone to go out and make Sign Painters too. There's so much great stuff that we did not cover, and we will back you guys all the way. We won't be doing it anytime soon. It is hard to sit in this museum specifically and not think about how cool it would be to make a film about neon.
Yeah, there's been some neon people who have really advocated for that film, but
For Faith and I think some of the most interesting components of what I think would be a sign about neon is also about it also shows up in sign painting. Like some of the primary themes and the things that are most interesting to us were really covered, and that kind of comes back to what Mark was saying, that, everything you see and most lettering, in my opinion, that is the most worthwhile and really speaks to when it was made or the location it was made in or the era in which a movie came out that has hand lettering titles. Everything begins with a hand and a pencil or a pen, and that would apply to neon. So someone should go make it, but we did our thing.
and as far as extras, and you have 120 hours of footage, so you could theoretically put out little mini documentaries of certain sign painters if you wanted to.
Yeah,
or some
we're going to keep
events.
releasing additional features and stuff.
So we can keep an eye on that.
Yeah, there's probably 30 minutes of additional features that extend beyond the film with longer interviews on the website also.
Okay. Cool. Mark, what process do you go through when coming up with a new design? I know you touched on some of it with your Sharpie sketches and things like that, but is that, are you coming up with the complete ideas, or are you coming up with, does the client have something that they want to have in mind and then they just leave it to you? I guess it's different with different clients, but What's basically your process?
I can answer that really briefly with a couple of examples from my day job as well as from this sign in front of me. At Yesco, we do it. Of the 17 designers we have in our office, a lot of people do work by hand. A lot of people still start off by thumbnailing around. Then they'll immediately scan what they're working on, or just pull that idea into one of their design programs and take off. The best clients, whether they're really large clients or whether not they're small clients, are the ones who have kind of an idea of what they want to say and what they want to accomplish, and we will put on our brand experts or brand consultant hat, draw them out as much as we can about what we think, what we see. So when the design process is collaborative all the way through, that's always best. But what I tell the young designers who work with me that they just don't understand, I think they think that I'm making it up every time I tell them, is the typical small sign shop clients in the commercial shops where I used to work, the customers who came in, and this was not just somebody who wanted a for sale by owner sign, but somebody who wanted a sign for their facade over their business, they came to you because you were supposed to know how it looked. They come in and say, well, we really like the work that you did for the guys down the street. How much would it cost to do something really great? And we'd say, well, we can do something that is nice and kind of in that vein, or we could take it a little bit further. And the guys would say, fine. And you'd say $3,000. And the guy'd say, fine, here's $1,500, and would come back on Friday and pick it up with no sketch. Any more than you would ask the plumber to prove that he was going to be able to fix your plumbing, or that you'd want to see examples of an electrician's work. All you'd want to do is see the guy's license. The idea that kind of authority and respect and professionalism was granted to the sign painter by the clients is something that the younger designers just don't seem to get. Nowadays, thanks to technology, you're back for multiple revisions and tweaks before you ever get into making of the piece. On this one, I did have an interesting moment that reminded me that you're never too old to, and it was when I decided that I was going to make a sign on Thursday. So I made a quick sketch, ran by Home Depot, picked up a board, came home and typed it, started working on the pattern, came in the next morning and wrote an email to Cynthia saying, I decided to make a sign. I got too nervous, and so I just got to get my head in the right place, so I'm going to paint a sign. And it is going to read Unsigned Heroes. And when I typed in heroes, Heros, the little red squiggly thing came up underneath, and I thought, shit. And I looked at my sketch, and I'd misspelled it. So, and thanks to the end, so I said, okay, now I really don't have time to do it. I don't have time to change it. So, and I don't know why I told that story on myself. It's just that, all I knew is I really loved the design and I loved the layout, but I just didn't really bother to double check the spelling. So I redid it, and so, and then the S looks like it's sort of going off by itself a little bit over there. Next time I'm going to start pointing out the flaws about it.
No, but at least you caught it. Some of the most, genuine mistakes are the best. When you see like ECTs, etc., or even there's one down on near Main Street. It says Copmupter, because it's a computer diagnostics. It says Copmupter. I mean, Copmupter. I don't know how you can misspell computer in this day and age, but it was done.
All the shops that I worked for, especially the silkscreen shops, had a great collection of ones that had made it all the way through. And my favorite ones were where it was really emphatic. Like there was one, there was a trespassing sign in this beautiful script with an underline. It said, "Absolutely, no, no trespassing." And then they printed 50 of those, and so there were still several of them up on the walls. You know, it was just like, you know, you definitely and you absolutely do not even think about trespassing.
Yeah, well, no regrets there.
Yeah.
So.
We had a lot of stories misspelled. There actually is a follow-on question to this one, if we can keep it brief, which is, how do you make the selection for the hand lettering and use the sign that you just did as an example? Like, why did you choose that style?
Okay, this one I was, that's one of the things that I always like enjoying is working in vernacular. And what might have been an interesting slide for this is the 10 5-minute sketches that I did before I decided on this one to proceed forward, because there would have been many ways of handling and arranging that copy. For one thing, the sign doesn't have to be horizontal; it could be vertical. You could have just, picked out different words to emphasize. That's graphic design 101. It's very well known to anybody that works with graphics. But anyway, I wanted to do something that had a little bit of the Vegas vernacular and would look like it belonged out here at the museum. So that's sort of the direction that I went.
I think we also touched on this a little bit, but are there any sign painting schools locally, or anyone can answer this, but I think there's just the one in LA, but are there any at all West Coast or even East Coast that you know of that still train, apprentice, anything like that?
There's LA Trade Tech. What I do notice that's going on at some of the really prestigious art schools like Cooper Union and Parsons and some of the other colleges that teach typography, they're all of a sudden starting to do units and courses and write syllabuses for hand lettering, added skills, or add this to your portfolio. And it's also real significant that print magazine and communication arts and a lot of the other industry contests that are held now have these handmade competitions that they do. So there's a resurgence going along. As far as I know right now, LA Trade Tech is the only one. I do know that you can run across any number of other craftsmen who are interested in doing some courses, especially on not only beginner stuff, but on advanced techniques. And invariably, like we did, went to an AIGA, which is the organization for graphic artists out in Santa Barbara, and it was the first time that I'd seen the movie. And afterwards, we got invited to speak, and there were about 8 young designers who just came up and said, "Okay, fine, I'm convinced. Where do I, how do I start doing this? Where do I go?" And so that's yet to happen, is that there are more programs. Because, of course, you would have to ask yourself, as I always do, back to the 5-year apprentice question, what are you going to teach people? If it's vocational, if the idea is that instead of just having somebody who's just kind of a dilettante who's interested in this but actually wants to turn it into a living, then you'd better make sure that you're teaching them graphic design, chalkboard art, Illustrator, Photoshop, 3D Studio Max, and all the many things that they're going to need to have in their repertoire to be able to also offer sign painting, as well as gold leaf, wall work, all the other techniques.
Something interesting that started happening when we started traveling, doing screenings with the film, is we were able to play matchmaker between a lot of tended to be younger people who were interested in learning how to do traditional hand painting techniques with people who had established themselves within the trade. And it was not something that we necessarily signed up for, and sometimes it happened more fluidly than others. But there's been many stories of us kind of even just being at a screening and there being people in the audience who afterwards, were able to make that connection. So that's been kind of exciting for us to see unfold those relationships between like that generation gap.
Yeah, and Mark's painting in his garage every Saturday, as he said. So, you just show up.
Do you sell those brown papers, or would you file them? What do you do? I want one.
Okay.
I think I do too.
Sure.
I think we have time for one more question, and then...
Yeah, and I'm sorry that we couldn't get to everything, but there will be an opportunity to speak to people individually afterwards. So if we don't get to your question, you can always ask them. One thing that's come up in several questions is, do we know of efforts underway to preserve the actual hand-painted signs and then also the art of it? If we can just comment quickly on that. And I'll start by saying, in terms of Vegas vernacular, the project's ongoing. We never really set a limit to it. We stopped for a while just because, frankly, we were exhausted. And we had other things that we wanted to be able to do.
And there was a certain urgency downtown, especially with things getting renovated and people painting over things. And we went head on for 2 years straight almost, just photographing everything we could find. And a lot of it's gone now, but we're really glad we got it. So it's in the bag, and we've got it, preserved photographically, but still.
Yeah, and in terms of, would we do anything with it to get it out there and publish it? Yes, we just have to do it under the right conditions, because one of the major tenets of the project was that this was going to be issued under Creative Commons license for online use. But anyway, in terms of other preservation efforts, Sam, Faith, Mark, do you guys know of anything out there specifically?
I mean, there are a lot of people documenting signs or faded signs that are almost illegible. I don't know about individual communities' efforts to preserve signs.
There are a lot of them. Off the top of my head, I couldn't reel them off. There is a number of cities doing similar projects to what you guys have done here. There's a number of localized books published about ghost signs, which are the faded signs, the signs of buildings. And to be perfectly honest, I think that social media is a really interesting way that signs are being archived right now, because with people's usage of hashtags through Instagram, the amount of signs archived through that outlet itself is a total wormhole that you could get lost in for days and maybe longer. So, and it's scary because that media is sort of out there, and there is this element, I think, of wanting to have it in one place or having a printed copy of a book with that, but it's definitely something to acknowledge for sure.
Well, and hopefully this kind of stuff, this awareness circulating through social media and our film and your guys' project and Ghost Signs in the UK, that is really amassing a really great collection of ghost signs in this museum and the American Sign Museum is, it increases awareness. I don't think we need to. The way to fix it, or the way to keep these signs great and to create new future great signs, is to not necessarily build a box around an old sign. It's to inspire the new business owner that's taking over a building to not have the old sign painted over and then put up his big crappy vinyl banner over it. The idea is to inspire and or influence up and coming business owners and consumers to acknowledge the value of this, so that they stop going away, so that they just stay where they are, sort of where they were intended, and that people paint great new signs. That then in 100 years everybody can be worried about someone taking those away. But then there's already somebody painting new ones that in 100 years from then,
They'll all be floating because it's the future.
Yeah, I also just will say this: don't be afraid to be vocal with people that can actually do something in a community. If you're particularly worried about something that is important, don't be shy. That helps. Also, just in closing, the thing about hand-painted signs on
buildings in particular is they were designed in some respect to be ephemeral. And, the only way to really preserve them is to document them thoroughly if that's, what we want to do for historical purposes. But I would agree with everyone else. It's like we really want to make people aware of the fact that this is an important expression. It's not just, commercial archaeology that we're engaged in. We want this thing to be alive. And that's it for us, I think.